Thank you and welcome to the Cose WebEd webinar. Today's topic is Business Software Trends, What Tools Will Help My Business Grow, and will be presented by Bob Coppage. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to go over a few housekeeping items. My name is Adina and I will be the webinar organizer for today. I want to make sure that today's presentation is extremely valuable for you and would ask that you submit all questions by clicking on the question button in the control panel and typing in your question. Your questions are only visible to me. I will collect all submitted questions and we will do a Q&A with Bob at the end of his presentation. Now for the main event. I would like to introduce Bob Coppage. Bob is a CEO of Simplex IT, a managed service provider in Hudson, Ohio. Bob is a former CIO, developer, consultant, and has worn about every other IT hat. He has spoken numerous times at both local and national IT conferences and is well known for clearly and energetically translating IT challenges and opportunities into business speak. Without further ado, I will now hand it over to Bob Coppage.
Cool. Thank you, Adina. First of all, thanks to everybody for joining us. We're going to see about getting our screens up in a sec. And while we're doing that, I want to stress that for those of you who may have heard me before, I am a condescending, crotchety, arrogant SO, whatever, who is opinionated and all that, but I take it just as well as I dish it out. And what ends up happening here is, on things like this, is that I'm going to give you kind of a different view of your traditional software trends, how things are going from the industries and all that kind of fun stuff, than what you might get. And with the goal being, okay, all right, I have, not sure where that's going from. Okay, I'm not sure where that screen's coming from.
Bob, do you just want to click on your PowerPoint?
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. That screen's a different person's computer.
Okay. So I am going to...
Okay, there we go. How do we look on that?
You're good.
Okay. It's fun.
Yeah, just put it in slideshow view.
Okay, so can you see the main slide now?
Yeah, just put it in slideshow view because it's in a really small, condensed format.
Okay, which means we're probably on the second monitor.
There you go.
Hold on a second. Yeah, I know technology. I know real well. PowerPoint, not so much. So,
there you go. You're good.
Okay, let me get this guy out of there. All right. Within 10 minutes, we'll get it. Okay. So, as we were saying, now I need to do a little bit of a better job of explaining why you should actually pay attention to me, because I'm not sure I would after that. So, essentially, Simplex IT, we are a managed service provider. We've been set up since about 2007. Here are some of the awards and all of that good fun stuff. I'm not going to bore you with all that. We want to be your IT department. Isn't that wonderful as well? Who doesn't? We actually have three primary services. Number one is the Simplex IT, where we are handling either with existing IT departments or being the IT department. We also do a fair amount of DBA work for corporations, making sure they take full advantage of their corporate data, which we'll talk about a little bit. And then finally, the Simplex PM, project management. We don't do the project management. We certainly can, but better still is our goal is to make your project managers more effective and more efficient using some of the tools that we'll talk a little bit about today. So, so one of the things that I want to stress here is that we're going to talk about some of the trends that's happening as far as changes, but we're really going to talk as much about the changes that are happening in terms of how people access data and information, which I think is absolutely critical to understand that. We have been moving to the cloud as appropriate, which is a key term here, meaning that we don't just run to the cloud. We're not lemmings jumping off the ledge. We want to make sure that the right tool for the right job for both ourselves and our customers. And we also we actually, although we love to work with Cose and other companies or other organizations as far as events and the like, we do our own as well. We do a couple of free webinars. We do some on-site. We're located, by the way, here in Stowe. We just recently moved literally down the street from Hudson. So we do several events. We've got actually a really good security webinar, or excuse me, on-site here event coming up next month, yada, yada, yada. We also have about 140 YouTube videos. Email me if you want to get a copy of this presentation or if you want to get our newsletter. We really don't sell. We try to focus on educating and by creating relationships that organizations want to take advantage of. So, okay. Enough of that silliness. Now let's actually talk about some of the things that we actually want to talk about here. One of the key things I want to discuss, though, is really talking about how people are accessing information and data and how dramatically this has been changing over the past 5 to 10 years. And one of the things that people do, and especially for organizations that are either just starting out, meaning your Soho small office, home office, or organizations that have been around for a long time but find themselves in the position where they really just have missed the boat on a lot of changes, is you really need to understand some of the changes that have been happening underneath in terms of how people get information and all. And one of the things, and I just read this about a week or two ago, that really brings home to me, at least, some of the changes is that we use the term information technology. We use the term information technology as kind of like this catch-all. That's where all the cool stuff is. That's where all the technology is. That's how we're sharing the information and the processes that are going on. But one of the things that I think is really interesting is for the first 20 or 30 years, and by the way, got my first computer job when I was in around 1980, so I'm old. But for about the first 20 or 30 years of this business, it was information technology. The technology was the driving force behind it. Now we're actually seeing a bit of a change where now it's the information technology. And it's one of those things where, I mean, I hate to say, well, mind blown, because whatever, but one of the key things is as we're looking at information technology, as we're looking, whether it be from a small organization, medium organization, from an organization that needs to be well distributed, all that kind of fun stuff, is that it used to be we thought about the technology and how the technology really drove the business. Now we need to think in terms of the business and how technology can help move that forward and the like. So we're going to go through a whole lot of things here, and hopefully we'll leave room for a lot of questions. And in terms of questions, I want to stress, I already know this stuff that I'm saying. So there's really not much value to me except to hear my own voice, which is, as you can tell, kind of grating. So really take advantage of asking questions and all that kind of fun stuff. We'll get to them at the end, but we'll try to make sure that we've left a lot of room for questions. And this is one of those where ask away. This is where there's no sales pitch happening. So you've got a great opportunity to do this. Okay, so here's one of the telling slides that shows trends going on from 2008 to 2015, and especially if you're with an organization that is looking to change either how your employees or your stakeholders. And when we talk about this, I want to talk in terms of your organization, which means your traditional employees, but I also want you to consider your stakeholders, and stakeholders are essentially either your customers or potential customers, and your vendors/partners or potential vendors/partners. Because the whole idea is we want to make people to be able to go out and do business, which usually means some kind of transfer of information, transfer of knowledge, transfer of experience. We want to make that as relatively seamless as possible and yet make it secure. And one of the things I want to show here is if you see this chart that goes from 2008 to 2015, and it shows essentially how much time adults are using with digital media. And digital media, this is one of those look for the trend, don't look for the specifics. So if you see the blue part down in the middle shows between 2.2 to 2.4 hours, meaning that are desktop laptops, meaning you're essentially getting information the old-fashioned way. I am sitting in front of a laptop right now. I have a computer. I have a device that is basically made to be lugged around and to be placed on a desk and used. That hasn't changed. In spite of organizations and companies using more and more technology, transferring more and more data, more and more information, that really hasn't changed. If, however, you take a look at the mobile devices, which would be your iPads, your phones, your small tablets, all that kind of fun stuff, we go from 0.3 hours in 2008 to 5.6 hours, okay? And if you take a look at this from a financial standpoint, in terms of people making financial decisions, buying things, doing things that need to be considered important from a business standpoint, you see a similar trend. Now, what that means is that when we look at and we consider software, we consider how we want to go out and to interact, again, with our stakeholders, we are absolute, pardon my French, morons if we ignore the mobile component. And one of the examples that I use is if you take a look, and I mentioned earlier that the same trend is true in terms of financial. If you take a look at how much actual business was conducted on mobile devices, you'll see the same trend. If we look back at around 2008, 2009, nobody bought anything on their phone. If they had a browser on their phone or a tablet, they would go and they would look at something. And then they go back to the office, get on their laptop or computer, and they'd buy it. And we went through a similar trend back around 2000. We would shop online but buy at the store. Well, now it's completely the opposite. We go shop at a store and then run home and buy it online. But we had this trend where as we started adding commerce to the mobile devices, prior to that, all we were doing was sending information through emails and the like. It wasn't that from a secure standpoint, from a wanting to have things secure, encrypted, protected, all that kind of fun stuff wasn't as important. Now you can see the trend. And if you look at, especially around holiday seasons and all that, the amount of money that's being spent through mobile is getting close to the same as is being spent online through traditional desktops and laptops. Now, the reason I want to bring this up is for two reasons. Number one is all of those trends, when we look at how we want, again, stakeholders, how we want them to do their jobs, how we want them to access information, share information, how we want them to actually engage either us as a company or engage our customers, our vendors, our suppliers, and the like. We're going to have more and more demand for that to be on the mobile devices. And this is coming from a guy who grew up on computers. So this is absolutely critical. Now you have to recognize the fact that the mobile experience is a very different experience. It's much more, people will buy things much more on impulse, much more quickly, without as much information, all of that kind of fun, which is both good and bad. So this is one thing when we're talking about organizations looking for how they want to invest as far as software and just overall event stuff. And this is absolutely critical. You have to understand that as a business owner. And this is just a different way of showing it. This shows essentially device shipments for small, medium businesses. And again, when you look at smartphone tablet shipments, the numbers between 2012 and, well, halfway through this is 15, 16, and you're looking at the same thing. If you look at desktops, laptops, servers, printers, they're all, well, either showing little growth or actual shrinkage. Ultrabooks are going up somewhat. So this shows exactly the same thing. So whenever you are looking for opportunities to engage, again, stakeholders, shareholders, customers, vendors, all that, you have to take this into account. Okay. Same thing as far as company versus bring your own devices. The mobile devices is absolutely growing. Now, one of the challenges on this is the BYOD, the bring your own devices. And part of the challenge that you find yourselves in is, if you think about it, and I'm just going to take customers and vendors and put them in the same bucket. So essentially you have three people or three parties. You have, or actually two parties in terms of this discussion. Number one are your employees, and number two are the external stakeholders. The problem is that if you do not provide the devices, then you are somewhat, and this is depending upon the devices, you are somewhat dependent upon how secure those other folks are making their devices when you give them the keys to the kingdom to access your information. So in other words, let's take the simplest one. If you are giving people access to company email on their phones and they are not actively securing their phones, meaning they're connected to unprotected wireless hotspots, they are installing malware, they're doing all of these kind of things, then you have essentially given an implied key to the kingdom for them to get that information, because depending upon what people do, all of this information can be tracked and seen very, very easily. The example that I almost always use is the flashlight app. This is an application, it's a classic application that people use on their phones for phones that don't have flashlights built in. So I'm going to go ahead and install this application. And the application literally has millions of downloads. So people love this flashlight app. It's a great flashlight app. And they also have hundreds of thousands of reviews giving it 4 or 5 stars, meaning that this is a fantastic, it flashlights with the best of them. Fantastic, great. And it's free, which means the guy who wrote it out of the goodness of his or her heart. And the first thing when you install that flashlight app, it asks is, can I have access to everything? Can I have access to your accounts? Can I have access to your documents? Can I have access to your wireless traffic? Can I have access to all of these things? And remember, I said over 2 million people have installed the application. Over 2 million people have said, yes, I think it's a great thing for you to have access to all my information so I can see in the dark. And these people, out of them, a couple 100,000 actually responded and reviewed it and rated this application. Now multiply that by the tens of thousands of applications that are out there for mobile devices that you don't necessarily have control over, but you're giving access to your corporate information through these devices. And what ends up happening is, I will give odds that 3/4 of the people on this call right now have malware on their phone right now. Just simply because it's too easy. And the tools for preventing it, the tools for blocking and detecting it are still relatively in their infancy, and everybody gets annoyed because the battery drains so quickly. So that's one thing I want to leave you with as far as understanding that when you start talking about bringing mobile phones in, it's not just a, hey, let's give everybody access to it. Now there are products, there are tools, there are methodologies that you can use to minimize these risks, but you have to have those, you have to know those, and you have to implement those, and those are complicated when you start giving these resources out to third parties. When you start giving these resources out to your customers, to your vendors, all that, it's hard to tell them, hey, we won't let you connect unless you agree to a certain level of security on your device. So, and there are ways around that, and love to have a conversation with you guys on that, but you'll notice we're really not talking about the technology. We're talking about more or less how to work with people and make sure that the expectations are appropriate. So getting to some of the points that we've got, the real world challenges that I think are just now starting to make themselves known is that we're all in a solution-rich environment, meaning that no matter what function you want to accomplish, no matter what service you want to take advantage of, no matter what anything, this is Henry Ford's worst nightmare. You know, Henry Ford was, and actually I'm not sure he actually said this, but you can have any color car you want as long as it's black. Now, any company that has that mentality is going out of business, just pure and simple. And this gives you an idea. And as you see down on the bottom, we have the mobile users, meaning that we have users that are high tech. They know exactly how to do what to do things as far as their devices and the like. We have who are 2 steps from Amish, where they barely know how to press the button, and all points in between. That middle tier, and this middle tier has been happening over the past few years, is now if you take a look at it, not everybody wants to go after information with the same device. So we now have I've got my iPhone, I've got my Android, I've got my iPad, I've got my Android tablet, I've got my Windows tablet, I've got my Mac, I've got my MacBook, I've got et cetera, et cetera. And all of those we want to, because as a provider of the information, as a provider of the services, if I deny people access to that information through one of those technologies, of like, I'm cutting off my nose to spite my face. So, and there may be good reasons for doing that. You may basically say that we cannot provide the appropriate level of security if you go with a dumb device like this, or we can't give you the full features that you're looking for because this device doesn't have that kind of functionality. But you need to prove that it's justifiable that you're not providing it. And then finally, we've got all of the applications, and we are going to talk about some of the applications of the like. And the applications are, you know, they're all over the place. As far as you name it, somebody is providing the applications, whether they be as a service, meaning that you're simply paying a monthly recurring fee, a subscription, if you will, and all of the infrastructure, all the capital investments, all of that is provided by the third party. So all you're doing is paying the monthly fee, which is absolutely the way the model is moving for majority. And you can have services that are more generic, so their file storage, their email, they're the like. So they're pretty much very similar across the board, almost to the point, excuse me, almost to the point where we're commoditizing them. And then we have some of the in-between, where they have higher level services and the like. But you've got full ERP systems that are available, full ERP systems that are available for small organizations and the like as well. And boy, this is just changing dynamically, and that's the one thing that you can rely on, is the fact that it is going to change. So what we're left with, and this is an actual display of what could be an organization's. Every one of these icons represents a service that an organization may be using with their employees. So every one of those, we have to have an employee account, and possibly one account for every employee. Now think about that for a second. So if I have an organization that has 20 employees, and I have, let's say, just 10 of these, that means I have to keep track of 10 users, 10 accounts, 10 passwords, times 20 employees. So I've got 200 accounts and passwords that I need to make sure my employees know. And this is going to increase, because not everybody needs all of these. Some need different. You may have people that are in the social media side that are going to need access to some of the services, whereas other people who are in the shipping, whereas other people who are in the marketing, whereas other people who are in the ordering and all that kind of fun stuff. And as we use more and more of the cloud-based or third-party services, we're going to have more and more accounts that we don't necessarily centrally control and manage. This is especially going to become more and more difficult for organizations to maintain as they find themselves with multiple employees. Both from a standpoint, we've all got the situation where, how do I keep track of all my 30 or 40 or 50 passwords and accounts, as well as an employee just left the organization, how do I manage to reset that person's credentials so that they can't go and buy the company a goodbye present with their credentials. And this is one of the solutions here that's becoming more and more popular, our SSO, or single sign-on services. Now, what these are, and this happens to be AVGs, there's other third parties as well, is this allows you to create essentially an online database of all of your employees, and for each employee you set up the credentials here so that they never actually know what their credentials are. They simply go to this website or load this app on their mobile device, and they simply go to the services immediately. Now, the nice thing on this is this way, when an employee starts, it's somehow indicated here are the services that they need, the accounts are created, the passwords are set up, they're embedded into this application, and the employee never needs to know the password. They never need to know passwords changing, they never need to know reset, they don't need to remember it, and they don't get to, as soon as the account is reset on the top level, that person no longer has access to that information again. You're going to see a lot more organizations that are implementing, whether it be the AVG solution such as this is, Microsoft also with their Azure solution has their version of it. There's a lot of third parties that have this. So this is going to become more and more prevalent. And you can see all of these services that are available, and we'll talk about what some of the differences are. And all of these have value for organizations. And this is just another fact that we're going to get into a little bit. So you need to have a business strategy, okay? Your organization needs to know how are you going to go to market, how are you aligning with what your customers, what your services are, and the like. All right, you need to then align that with the devices and the resources that your customers are going to be using. This is kind of a different way of approaching some of the stuff that we talked about earlier. Okay. And this 55% SMBs support a mobile workforce. Keep in mind, figures don't lie, liars figure. All right. So whether that's higher, whether that's lower, or the like. The issue, though, is that when you think in terms of employees being able to access corporate resources, we want the flexibility to be there so that they can be as productive as possible, but we also want it to be as secure as appropriate as well. And there's kind of a yin-yang going on between those two, which we'll talk about a little bit. Now let's talk about some of the services. And unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately, we're not really going to get too much into specific services, although we can during the Q&A. And the reason being is because those change so frequently, both what they apply, what they do, what they give access to, so on and so forth, that whatever I tell you is obsolete 10 minutes later. So, but let's talk about, and I'm aiming this at mostly organizations that are in the smaller to medium range. And these services are available for a higher scale as well, but for the most part I'm keeping it in the SMB world. So by SMB I would say 400 users and less. So when we talk about flavors of the cloud, and again we're really focusing on the services that the cloud-based software is bringing to the table. Here's some categorizations that I use. And first of all, there's the free services, they're commodities, then service or commodities for individuals, then service commodity for corporate, vertical apps corporate, corporate infrastructure for corporate, blah, blah, blah. One of the first things I tell people is that consider the fact if it's free, that means something. So if organizations are giving away information for free or giving away services for free, there's a couple of things that you can pretty much rely on. Number one, that they're making money somewhere. And for example, if you take a look at a lot of the stuff that Google does for free, they're actually gathering metrics about your search patterns, about some of the keywords that are used, all of that kind of fun stuff, and then reselling them, or, and in some cases, depending upon the services, actually then using it to guide advertising to you. And to give you an example, I'm in great shape as long as oval is considered a great shape, and I was doing a walking around a track for pretending to work out and the like. And one of the things that had happened is with my phone, which just decided to go off, with my phone, after about 3 trips around the track, I had a pop-up. And the pop-up came up and said, would you like to buy a pedometer? One of those things that figures out how far you've walked and all that. Now, I want you to keep in mind what just happened there is essentially that not only was there GPS that was tracking where I was, it also tracked what basically what direction and what kind of course I was walking, and from that was able to determine I'm probably doing a walking around a track, and was then able to sell essentially my information to a company, a third-party company, to create an ad to go up, to pop up, because I'm a buyer. I'm a potential buyer for a pedometer. Now, I didn't sign up for anything along those lines. I didn't do anything. But this service was able to, because of the free stuff that I was taking advantage of, was able to use my information to basically get into an agreement with a third party, with a reseller. So that's happening. The other stuff on the free stuff is usually the protections aren't as great. The security isn't as great. The feature set isn't as great. So those are all great and wonderful, but you have to recognize you're getting what you pay for. So keep that in mind. So free service commodity for individuals would be, for example, the Gmail, the Outlook.com, formerly Hotmail, a lot of the free lowercase type of emails that don't really work together from a corporate environment. The Dropboxes, iCloud, a lot of the cloud-based storages, which are very easy to hack into and very easy to lose data in. Those kind of things. A lot of the Facebook, LinkedIn, all of that's where they get information, they get value, the vendors, from presenting you with advertisements and the like. When we talk about service and commodity for the individual, now we're talking about we're going to pay for something. We're going to pay a little bit, and often what that does is that creates, it's the same service, but it's more of a Cadillac. If you wanted to get a LinkedIn service and you're paying for it, you get more functions, you get more features, usually though that are aimed at the individual. So if you buy a LinkedIn subscription, you're going to pay a monthly fee. You're going to be able to do more job searching, you're going to be able to be a little more aggressive in terms of asking people for connections, all of that kind of stuff, but it's still pretty much aimed at the individual. Then we start talking about service commodity from a corporate standpoint. We'll talk about what that means a little bit, but one of the things when we start talking about service commodity from a corporate, that means that now we can actually control multiple users. So there's a single pane of glass, a portal, if you will, that allows us to see here are the 10 people who are employees of the company that have this account, that have this service, that has this. And I can now manage those 10 people, or whoever is given the keys to the kingdom can now do that. When you first start looking at these things, that doesn't look to be terribly important, but as those of you who have employees know, to be able to manage them, the more easily you can manage and you can see what they're doing, or you can have control on them, the better. So this would be where you're talking about Google Docs, Google Apps that are more on the when you're paying for the services. This would also absolutely be Office 365. One of the things that people ask me the difference between Google's products and Microsoft's 365 products. They're both very, very good. They're both very, very powerful. Google is very powerful in terms of what it allows the individual or user to do. It's okay in terms of controlling a corporate, giving more corporate control, corporate maintenance, all that. Whereas Microsoft is exactly the opposite. It's okay as far as what they allow the individual user do, but it's really good when you start looking at the corporate standards and corporate implementation. It's kind of a rough, and there's some exceptions to that, but that gives you a rough starting point as far as what the differences are between the two. But the service and commodity from a corporate standpoint, you're paying for the value. You've got a single pane of glass. You've got a single way to manage and maintain these things. But it's pretty much, it's not really unique to your business, to your line of business. It would be, again, your corporate storage, cloud-based storage, infrastructures, email, BI tools, all of that kind of fun stuff. The vertical application, all right, now we're talking about this is how your company, this is what is your core line of a critical business application. So this would be your accounting, your manufacturing, your MRP, ERP type systems, customer relationship management, all of that kind of fun stuff. And for these guys, one of the challenges that we talk about, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later on, is you need to remember that for most part, organizations that have been around for a couple of years, you're not operating in a vacuum, meaning that you have already a history of information, a history of data. You already have materials and information that is useful to you. You need to have a good feel for how these new services will integrate with what you've done in the past. And what ends up happening with a lot of organizations that haven't thought these through is you end up with this gap between the old way of doing things, or this other method we use for gathering and measuring information, and this new method. So an example of that would be if I have one database that tracks everything by zip code, and I have another database that tracks everything by city. Okay, that's great, but zip codes don't necessarily mean cities, and cities don't mean zip codes, so it'll be very hard for me to actually link those two together. It's a little bit of an example, but hopefully gives you the idea. You need to, when you start taking a look at these services, you need to see how well they integrate with both your existing systems on-premise as well as other cloud systems. They're getting better, but they're still kind of on I would say they're about at their 1.0 version from that. And so we do another talk on BI, and one of the examples I use from a BI standpoint is a company who has up in the cloud, they have their CRM. Locally, they have on their premise, on their servers, they have their order management system, which includes their sales and all that kind of fun stuff. They then have a marketing system where they're taking a look at all of the shows that they can have booths at, and then they've got census information so that they can see whether or not where people live, so they can compare, here's where we do really well, we're looking to go over with this particular product line, we're looking to go over to this area, is that area the same kind of residence, so it makes sense to promote the same kind of product. Well, the business intelligence tools are now getting to the point, and they're pretty darn cheap, by the way, so that you can actually take a look at information from all these differing, not only are they differing data sources, but they're differing data, you've got on server, you've got services, you've got public records, all of that kind of thing, to bring all that into a single pane of glass and to ask those questions. That information is really starting to, within the past 12 months, really starting to look pretty cool. And again, it's pretty cheap to get started using that kind of stuff. So. And then corporate infrastructure is the last one. That's really, infrastructure are your train tracks and your trains. So we've got our servers, we've got our workstations, we've got our switches, our routers, our firewalls, all the things with blinking lights that end users don't touch. We can now put those in the cloud as well with relatively minor, with some limitations depending upon the size of the organization, what it is you're trying to do. And it gives us a whole heck of a lot more flexibility, especially for organizations where you are not centrally, everybody isn't in one building. And we'll talk a little bit about what I mean by that. But that infrastructure is becoming more and more business as usual. So it's pretty much when we talk about infrastructure, it used to be, oh, you're part in the cloud, is that amazing? Now it's not exciting one way or the other. You should have, your stuff should be where it needs to be, pure and simple. So Another thing I want to talk about real briefly are the four models of access. So we've got our information, whether it be up in the cloud or on-premise or the like, and there are these basic four models. Local means you don't have an internet connection. So local would be it's on your computer. If you're in the airport and you don't have a wireless connection, or if you're on a plane, can you access your data? Is that important? Which would be where your local premise is, or local is. On-premise would be when you're inside your building and you have servers, you have other resources, so it's not on your computer, but you have access to the information there. Cloud is just that. Cloud, the term cloud is all over the bloody place, and what we tell people is cloud just means it's not on your premise. It's somewhere else, and it's a third party that's actually hosting the information. And then the one that's becoming more and more prevalent is the hybrid, because not always is it as simple. If you have employees that are, if you have 90% of your employees are in one location, on-premise makes sense. But for those 10% that are off-premise, you should give them some method and possibly cloud-based to access the data. So if it's a combination of local and or on-premise and cloud, that's a hybrid. Those are becoming more and more prevalent as far as they make the most sense, the right tool for the right job. So the types of data, when we talk about the applications, so we have Office files, and those are really your Word documents, Excel, PowerPoints, all those kind of fun stuff that usually a person works on at a time. And you may have multiple people when we start talking about multiple users working on it and the like, but it's pretty much single file type stuff. Then we've got single user application files, which would be your CAD files and the like. Database files, whether it be Access, QuickBooks, and the like, collaborative files, applications, and data. When you start talking about what type of solutions and what type of strategies you want to use, it's good to know what type of information, what type of data that you're actually looking to share and how you're looking to share it. Because some solutions work better with other data than others. Especially if you're talking about off-site storage of documents and the like, Office files work really, really good. Database and applications and data, not so much. So these are things that can be cleared up with relatively simple conversations, but they're good conversations to have before you start buying the applications or the services. And then the type of applications are important as well. And here's the thing on these. These things are changing constantly. Third parties are coming up with newer versions, newer methods, all that kind of fun stuff. And my challenge on these is that you have the top tier, which would be your primary companies who offer these services, and then you've got these second and third tiers, and a lot of them you've never heard of, and a lot of them you never will. And one of the challenges is that if you go with one of the commodities, one of the stuff that's just normal, it is nothing exciting. It's just this company does it a little bit different than other company. Does it make sense to go against the big guys? So cloud storage, for example. Cloud storage, you want to make sure that it's got the right level of security. You want to make sure that it has the right level of controls. You want to make sure that if you have 10 employees, can you answer the question as to, are those employees giving out the information? Are they sharing their files? Are they putting stuff there they shouldn't be putting? When was the last time they actually accessed the information? So on and so forth. Email, same thing. If somebody asks you to, I want to see all the email that had to do with this particular topic or this particular project, can you find that information? Same thing, collaboration. 2 or 3 people are going to be working on the same document either simultaneously or at various times. Can we go and do that? Online conferencing or online conferencing with GoToMeeting, Skype for Business, all that fun stuff. Once you figure out how to share the right screen, this stuff becomes terribly useful. But beyond this online conferencing, one of the things that we use, and we're a Microsoft shop, so we use Skype for Business a lot, and one of the things we use Skype for Business for is that if we see somebody's online, we can immediately text them and ask a question, hey, what's the status of this or the like? And if we want to talk to a customer or a potential customer and go over a contract or a proposal, we can very easily just send them an invite, even if they don't have Skype for Business, and get online and take a look at what we want to make changes in. So it's very, very easy, and it's very flexible in terms of what to go with. And then VoIP, RingCentral is what we're using for voice over IP, where we essentially, all we do is have phones, and actually we don't even need phones. We could just run them through the computer. Office 365 recently added their E5 program, which is essentially their versions of phone through Office 365. Not sure I'm there 100% yet with their implementation of it. And then security. There's more and more services that are adding local security through cloud-based services. And we actually have a luncheon coming up in July that's going to be talking about this, kind of an overall strategy. One of the key things to keep in mind with security is that only about 30% of hits in terms of attacks that companies face from a security standpoint, only about 30% come through viruses. The rest come through malware, exploitations, all of that kind of fun stuff. So if all you're doing is antivirus, and especially remember all these mobile devices, yeah. If all you're doing is antivirus, you really don't have a good security strategy. These are some of the things that we do. 99 is a great service to keep your like Java and Flash and Adobe Acrobat up to date, and OpenDNS is a great way to track to keep you away from sites that are infected with malware that will try to infect you with malware. So that's a great service too. Quick question about the apps and services. When you're talking about for organizations, can you manage multiple users? How secure is the data? Secure is the provider. How do they make money? And look for reviews. Talk to people. See what they're doing. One of the key things, though, is how do you manage multiple users? I think that's absolutely, because how do you make sure that your people are using it appropriately? And let's see. And then I wanted to talk about this on the plumbing, and then we're pretty much going to wrap up in terms of, I want to leave time for questions. But here's the key. When we talk about using cloud resource or the like, whenever you are connected into your network at your location, you are usually communicating, if you plug your computer into the network, usually at about 1,000 million bits per second, or 1 gigabit per second of information at your location, meaning that all the servers and the workstations and all those devices are literally talking at 1 billion bits per second. When you go to the cloud, and you can have multiple connections, multiple devices, so it's lots of lines connecting. When you go to the cloud, you are connecting through whatever the internet pipeline is. The internet pipeline for a fiber connection these days, a good fiber connection, is usually about 10 megabits per second. So we've gone from 1,000 for all the devices connecting locally to 10, and all the devices for that location are communicating with the internet back and forth at 10 using that one pipe. So that one pipe is absolutely, so you've got stuff locally, you're going to be able to use it, get to it, work with it literally 100 times faster in that example than you can do stuff in the cloud. And I don't want to, there's a lot more complexity to that as far as thin clients, all that kind of fun stuff. But I want you to understand, when you're talking about people accessing your information at your network, so if you have a customer who's off-site accessing information that's at your location, they're connecting through their internet connection and then through your internet connection. And the slower of the two wins. So if they may only have a T1 line, which sounds great, it's 1 megabit per second, 1.5 megabits per second. So they're even slower. So keep that in mind as you start planning on where stuff is. And especially if you don't have the bandwidth to have a 5 megabit connection, so you put the stuff up in the cloud, and now they can get a much faster connection to that. That's where you would do a hybrid. So all of the information that your employees need locally, you would have over here down on the bottom left, oops, whereas all of the cloud, the hybrid stuff, would be over there on the upper left. Okay? And got a bunch of stuff. Security 101. One thing about security, Security is authentication and authorization. Everything else is detail. Authentication, who are you? How do we know who you are? Do we have a password? Do we have a biometric? Do we have a chip? Do we have whatever? And then now that we know who you are, what can you do? Those are the two key things that we need to do, whether it be mobile devices, laptops, desktops, anything along those lines. And we're going to leave the rest of the stuff go. And actually, I just wanted to make sure we left time for questions, so I don't know if we have any or not. So I see we got about 10 minutes left.
All right, Bob. Well, I've been monitoring the chats, and so far no questions. So I will allow you some time to type up a question if you do have one. Make sure you send it through the chat feature. We'll give it about maybe a minute or two, but
Sure.
if not, I will let you know. But make sure you send your questions to me in the chat box. And thank you, Bob, for speaking for us today. I really appreciate it.
No, happy to do it.
Well, it looks like everyone's a little shy, and there are no questions at this time, but Bob's contact information is on the slides. If you have any questions about anything that he presented in this webinar, feel free to reach out to him directly. Additionally, if you want a copy of the slides, I'll be able to distribute them to you. Just send me a quick email, and I'll make sure I get those over to you. But without further ado, thank you, Bob, for your time, and thank you all for attending.
Cool. Thanks. It was fun.